Public service is my motto. Al Capone. I make my money by supplying a public demand. If I break the law, my customers are as guilty as I am. My rackets run strictly along American lines. This American system of ours, call it capitalism, call it what you like, gives each and every one of us a great opportunity. If we only seize it with both hands and make the most of it.
Al Capone was determined to make the most of it. He was going to ride the booze business to the top. In his eyes, that meant running Chicago, and nothing or no one could stop him. Before Capone and Prohibition, the best-known crime boss in Chicago was Big Jim Colosimo. And in 1920, Colosimo was in love. He was more interested in his new flame than the new racket. He told his guys not to get into bootlegging. His old rackets, gambling and prostitution, were paying off just fine. He didn't want to expand. He didn't want the risk, the trouble. He liked things just the way they were. Five years after the hit on Colosimo, Chicago has a new boss. It's no surprise. Al Capone becomes the CEO of American Pleasure. He creates an international industry, all illegal. A vast organization of producers, importers, distributors, salesmen. He employs thousands of people, builds breweries, distilleries, starts trucking companies just to deliver his booze. Al Capone's making over $100 million a year. He's 26 years old. He opens nightclubs, controls entertainers, buys politicians and cops. And what he can't buy with a buck, he gets with the elegant efficiency of the Tommy gun.
Introducing the Thompson Automatic Anti-Bandit Gun, the most effective portable firearm in existence.
Firearms experts say Tommy guns are noisy, useless for sport or self-defense, unfit for any honest purpose. Capone and the movies loved them.
Get out of my way, Johnny, I'm gonna spit!
Come on, fellas! Hey, Tony, take this along in case that bean shooter doesn't work.
Okay.
In automatic action, the gun will fire continuously until the trigger is released or until the magazine is emptied of its cartridges. Automatically, at the rate of 1,000 shots per minute. Sold only to responsible parties after a thorough investigation.
One of Capone's rivals, Frank McErling, becomes the first gangster to use the Tommy gun in Chicago. The day that Al Capone reads the news, he drives to his local hardware store and orders 3 Tommy guns for his own gang. Thus begins an arms race that will change America's cities forever. Al Capone.
Well, maybe the law of self-defense, the way God looks at it, is a little broader than the law books have it, right? Maybe it means killing a man who'd kill you first. Maybe it means killing a man in defense of your business. The way you make the money to take care of your wife and child. I think it does. You can't blame me for thinking there's worse fellas in the world than me.
The real Al Capone story has never been told. I mean, he was an amazing personality. You've got to realize that during his reign, and he was only the boss for 5 or 6 years, but in that 5 or 6 years, he was fighting off 3 groups of enemies. He's fighting off law enforcement, the Prohibition agents, or Elliot Ness, or any honest cop that might have been in the Chicago Police Department. He's also fighting the Irish gangs of Dee and O'Banion. He is also fighting the Sicilians, the Aiello brothers that he had to fight and kill. And he did a pretty marvelous job of all of it. But what was really his key to strength? It was politics.
Politics. In 1928, Capone's biggest expense is bribing public officials. But the unpopularity of Prohibition makes corruption easy and organized crime inevitable.
Organized crime means you're connected with politics. That's what makes it organized. You know, it's never organized if there's nothing else. It's not just because you have a gang. There are a lot of gangs of people around, but they have no other connections. The organized crime means contacts with legislators, with DAs, with judges, with people that can make sure nothing really bad happens to you. You know, that's what makes it organized. You needed cops not to raid you. You needed that because everything was illegal. I mean, these speakeasies could be busted any time. And when they were, it was for combination pitches, as they call them, you know. You had to do it so that the precinct captain can once in a while have a statistic, you know. So you go to the guy in advance. You say, look, we're going to pitch it tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. Make sure not too much is there, this, that. And, you know, you have to go. You're going to get arrested. There'll be cameras. Come out like this. Put your thing over your head like a schmuck and do that. And that'll be the accommodation pitch. They'll bail you out. The judge will give you nothing. We'll put it off till the heat's off, and then you'll get a slap on the wrist. Everything is all worked out.
Bring on the girls and spike up the band.
Illinois Crime Survey, 1929.
We have complained of crime. We have preached respect for the law, yet we have exhibited to our youth the spectacle of policemen in full uniform, acting not only as customers, but as partners in our brothels, in our gambling houses, in liquor selling.
When you have prohibition, there's a price you're going to pay for it. One is corruption. It's going to happen. It can't ever not happen. Now a guy's used to taking money. He's used to making deals with the wrong people. And now you can have a shooting, a murder. And now they come to you with the same thing. But you see, they own you a little bit now. Murders were going on. Nobody got indicted. They said they only killed their own, but sometimes they didn't only kill their own, and still nobody got indicted.
The romance between Al Capone and the people of Chicago comes to an end on St. Valentine's Day, 1929. The newspapers that day report 6 men from the Bugs Moran gang and an unlucky optometrist who's a mob buff were mowed down in a Chicago garage. They were Capone's arch rivals. The shooters, of course, used Tommy guns, and everybody blames Capone.
Well, you want to know how they my guys missed the St. Valentine's massacre? This is the story they told me. This is before my time. My husband had a habit that he loved to be up all night, but he would sleep sometimes till 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon before he'd get up. Then he'd have his 2 soft-boiled eggs, his orange juice, and half a cup of coffee, and that was the end. He'd go to work in the pits, in the gambling pits. So anyway, they told me that they all went to the hotel to try to get Moe out of bed. All of them, Davy, Berman, them, try to get, I think he said Davy was there. Davy could have been in prison in those years. He did 8.5 years in prison. Well, anyway, those part of our guys couldn't get Moe up, and they late getting him up. So they went over to where they all were supposed to meet in some big garage or something in Chicago. And then they got about a half a block after they parked the car from where they were going to go in, and then they heard machine guns going. So they turned around and raced back to the car. And after that happened, nobody ever yelled when Moe overslept. They'd say to him, "You tired, Moe? You go home and go to bed. We won't wake you up." Otherwise, they'd have been dead.
Today, in our much more violent nation, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre would be a minor two-day story. But in 1929, it's a scandal. People can't get over that the killers had dressed like policemen, shot their victims in the back, and then the head. It's just too much. Capone falls from hero to villain overnight. He starts getting blamed for everything. Al Capone.
Every time a boy falls off a tricycle, every time a black cat has gray kittens, every time there's a murder, the police, the papers, they holler, "Get Capone!" Come on, they've hung everything on me, except the Chicago fire.
The mob's feeling the heat. St. Valentine's Day was very bad for business. So in Atlantic City, 3 months later, bootleggers from all over the country meet to avoid repeating Capone's PR disaster. They hammer out the basics. Carve out territories, put a lid on excessive violence, and above all, agree to be ruled by a national commission to which each and every one of them pledged their loyalty. They even get Capone to take the fall on a 2-bit gun charge, so things can cool off. Al gets 1 year. And when the stock market crashes later in 1929, he issues this statement from his cell.
Tell them I deny absolutely that I am responsible.
The crash is the beginning of the worst depression in U.S. history. Banks fail, businesses collapse, millions of Americans go on the breadline. The Depression is a disaster. But bad news for America has a way of being good news for the mob.